Good afternoon. I was a little bit concerned that when our students other parts of the world hear these tapes, they weren't going to believe really and truly that they were our classes, because there was no drilling on them and no streets being dug up, no fire wagons going by. But I see outside that that's taken care of today. The old familiar landmarks will be on our tapes, and they'll say that's an Infinite Way class.
If we close those windows, we'll keep out some of the noise.
Won't be necessary. Won't be necessary. I think our students would prefer to hear the noises. Something a little bit different is taking place in this class. In the 11 years that I've been teaching the message of the Infinite Way, we have never had a book devoted exclusively to the healing work. And each time that it has come to my thought to have such a book, that which guides me says no. And the reason is that if you concentrate exclusively on the idea of healing, you have to lose the very thing you're seeking. Whereas learning the principles, catching the entire vision, you have a background for healing, and then healing becomes just a part of the picture, and that's the way it should be. In other words, just as the Master taught that you're to take no thought for your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, so he might have gone on and said you're to take no thought for your health, but seek rather the kingdom of God, and let all these things be added unto you. And so it has been that in our work, as you read the writings or hear the recordings, you gradually develop a consciousness of truth. Sometimes you become aware of specific principles. At other times you are not so aware of the specific principles, but you know the general motif, and healing automatically fits into it. But evidently the time has come for a book, because that which is taking place here this week is very evident to be a book, and a book which will concentrate on the healing principles. So do not be surprised along about 1959 or 1960 if you receive notice of another book on the subject of spiritual healing, and then recognize your own class. Now, we come today to a statement that must be clearly understood in your mind. It can be misunderstood and has been misunderstood, but let no one in this class misunderstand when I tell you that all healing is a result of individual consciousness. Your individual consciousness, or mine, or someone else's. In other words, healing is not dependent on God. Healing is not dependent on what you might call or have heard as God consciousness or Christ consciousness, unless you think in terms of your consciousness as God consciousness or Christ consciousness. In other words, if you at this moment had a problem and you were given the choice of practitioner to go to, out of all the world and out of all time, your thought would immediately jump to Jesus Christ, and you would go to him in the complete assurance of receiving your healing. But why is this so? Why, if it is God that heals, or if it is God consciousness or Christ consciousness, why do you particularly need Jesus Christ? And your answer is because Jesus Christ has, so far as our conviction goes, proven to have the greatest degree of unfolded and realized God consciousness. Now, if you were told you might not have Jesus, who is next in line? And if you know your scripture, you will immediately say John. For undoubtedly John so completely approaches divine consciousness that I doubt that anyone knows where Jesus leaves off and John begins, or vice versa. In other words, they are two men with but one consciousness, and that one the divine consciousness. And so it would be that you would probably seek John, I would, next. And then if you had to go from there, your thought might go to Peter and to Paul, because they demonstrated in their healing work the tremendous capacity, the tremendous depth of their spiritual capacity, of their spiritual awareness. And so the answer to the healing problem is this: the healer is individual consciousness. The healer is the consciousness of any individual who has attained some measure of Christ consciousness. And the measure of it, that is, the measure that they have attained, determines the degree of the healing work. Now, where this is sometimes misunderstood is that there are those who might be led to believe that this gift of healing or Christ consciousness is a personal thing and therefore belongs to some person as such. And that, of course, would be introducing egotism. No one has in and of himself the healing consciousness, only in the degree that they have embodied the one divine consciousness as their individual consciousness, through the understanding that I and the Father are one, and all that the Father hath is mine. Now, by the grace of God then, God's consciousness becomes your individual consciousness. But how? Because now we come to that place, how do I attain it? How do I achieve it? How do I go from becoming a businessman, a salesman, to becoming a spiritual healer? How do I go from becoming a housewife to becoming a spiritual healer? And there is where we all need this guidebook, the Bible. For in it is this word of life. In it is the pattern that we must follow if we are to achieve Christ consciousness. At every step of your unfoldment, remember that you could make no progress without the grace of God. That is, of your own self, regardless of how determined you might be, regardless of what zeal you might put into it, regardless of how much faith you might have, if you at the same time haven't an element of divine grace, you will achieve nothing but the intellectual knowledge of the letter of truth. So it is that you have to give recognition to the fact that you did not bring yourself to this study, that something impelled you. That something that impelled you is within you. It is that which determines that this is the year for your opening yourself to this message, and perhaps out there may be 200, 300 who will be ready to open themselves next year or the year after or the year after that. Be assured of this: if all of these people out here were in this room or in our presence, it would benefit them nothing. Their physical presence would not give them the secret or the consciousness of this work. If I thought that it would, I'd place great big ads in the newspaper, promise to give away silken hose free, and have them here and then convey to them Christ consciousness. But it won't work. The impulse must be within the individual. Then it is that when the student is ready, the teacher appears for them. Now, with that acknowledgement, we are ready for the next step. There is no better way of arriving at what constitutes Christ consciousness than to study the four Gospels to see what manner of man Jesus was and what his teachings were, and then seek, insofar as it is possible, to emulate his ways. As you study these Gospels, you will learn, first of all, that he tells you how to pray. He also tells you how not to pray. He tells you what to pray for, what not to pray for. He tells you about praying in secret. He tells you about doing your good deeds without letting anyone in the world know that you're doing them, just trusting the invisible presence within yourself to know it and openly to reward. Then watch how he tells you that it profiteth you nothing to pray for your friends, that you must pray for your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. See everything that he has said on the subject, read everything, study everything on the subject of prayer, and then remember this, that you can only develop Christ consciousness in proportion as you can fulfill the life that he showed forth and follow the plan he gave. For every word he gave is a lesson unto us to go thou and do likewise. Now, you are told in this life and teaching of the Master that if you have aught against any man, there's no use to pray. And so we had our lesson yesterday. Start all prayer from the standpoint of purifying yourself. In other words, by clearing yourself of criticism, condemnation, judgment, bearing false witness against your neighbor, getting finally to the place where you can agree that man is spiritual, and this means universally truth all over the globe, good man or bad man, old man or young man, true being is spiritual. Then when you've done that, you have forgiven. And again you'll find in the Master's teaching that you are only forgiven your own debts in proportion as you forgive your debtors. And so you will see that all of the sins of omission and commission, which have resulted in our mental darkness, spiritual darkness, physical, moral, financial, all of that is because we have not released. Therefore, we have not been released. Who held us in bondage? Was it God? No, it is ourselves. Because we have the pattern. Forgive as ye would be forgiven. Bless as ye would be blessed. Pray for others as ye would be prayed for. In other words, love thy neighbor as thyself. And then only are you in the position of receiving grace. I'm going to digress for just a minute to take up with you the subject of supply, because it works in at this very point. Supply is not a very easy subject for me to teach. And the reason is that everybody already knows it in their heart and soul, but they don't want to obey it. And so when I teach it, I know I am up against that block, that wall that does not want to hear what I have to say. But it is a spiritual truth. Supply is not income. Supply is outgo. Now the human sense testifies otherwise, but spiritual law down through the ages has proven that everyone who is attempting to get supply by getting is getting less. The few materialists that disprove that always end up by proving that this is the truth. Now, supply is one of the easiest demonstrations that a spiritual student can make, because there's no limit to what a spiritual student can start to give away. You see, we are not dealing with amounts like a certain amount of dollars or pounds when we're talking about giving away. We're talking about giving. And giving has no relationship to amounts. It has to do with the degree of our givingness. So that it isn't necessary to give anything that you can't afford. It isn't necessary to decide on a sum of money that you can't possibly achieve. Givingness is the acknowledgement that supply is through giving. And then begin. Now, we may have, to start with, we may have to do a lot of giving of forgiveness. We may have to do a lot of giving up of the material concepts that we entertain of people. And we may have to give a lot of cooperation where we're now withholding it. We may have to give a lot of patience where we're not giving it. We may have to give up the desire to get recognition, reward, remuneration, gratitude, cooperation. Give it all up in the realization that it isn't what I get that is my supply, it is what I give. Then when it comes down to the dollars or pounds or shillings, we are never called upon for more than meets the common sense, but we are called upon to change our attitude and to begin at any given moment with the idea of, here starts this shilling in circulation. I don't care where it goes. as long as it starts out in circulation. The Scripture has given us this teaching under the name of tithing. Now, there are many people who believe that they cannot afford to tithe 10% of their income, and for them to try it might be disastrous at first. And so it would be well for those people to start tithing with 5% or 4% or 3% or 2%, as long as they determine on a set specific sum or percentage which they will give to some impersonal purpose, not to their families, not to their children, not to their own benefit, but to something completely impersonal, and if possible, that it be given in a secret manner so that nobody but themselves knows whence it came. Those who start that way very quickly get a guilt complex, because it only takes a couple of weeks to see that it was so easy to give 2 or 3% that automatically you decide it'll have to be 4% or 5%, and the 10% comes quickly. The strange thing is that rarely does it stop at 10%. I have 3 times in my career known individuals who were tithing 80% of all their income and had more left to live over on and with than they could possibly spend, even if they were extravagant. So that the law does prove itself that supply is not getting, supply is giving, and you will always have in proportion to your giving. Now, there is a second part of supply which must be recognized, and for the purpose of the infinite way, this is the most important part, because so far as I know, this is the first time it has been given to us. Not here, I mean in the infinite way. You have never seen supply. You can't see, hear, taste, touch, or smell supply. Supply doesn't exist in the visible realm. Supply is spirit or life. It is completely invisible, and you have an infinity of supply. You have no less supply than Jesus had, no less than Moses had, no less than Elisha had and Elijah had. And all you have to do is go back and study their demonstrations of supply and be shocked to know that they had such an infinity and proved it. And then to realize that we have exactly that same amount, not 1 farthing less. How do we arrive at that? Since God is infinite, there exists nothing but God. Then God must be all the supply there is. There is no other supply than God. And the moment you let your mind run to money, properties, bonds, stocks, and think of these as supply, you are off the track of demonstrating spiritual infinite supply. Supply has never been seen by anyone, for supply is the presence of God, Emmanuel, God with us. Now, your realization of the truth that God is closer to you than breathing and nearer than hands and feet is your realization and demonstration of the omnipresence and infinite nature of supply, since God is infinite And God in its infinity is closer to you than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Then, when you perceive this, you can begin to claim for yourself infinite abundance, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, and really and truly not insult your own intelligence, because now you are claiming the presence of God in you, the presence of infinite God, omnipresent God. And now you need take no thought for your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, or wherewithal you shall be clothed, or where the next automobile is coming from, or the next vacation trip. Drop these from your mind, for they are the added things. In other words, our outward good are but the symbols of the omnipresence of supply. Our classes have seen it in this wise. If I haven't a consciousness of supply, I can't have the symbol of supply in my pocket. First, I must have the consciousness of supply, and then the symbol follows on top of that. If I have the consciousness of the presence of God, where I am, Emmanuel, God with us, the place whereon I stand is holy ground. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. When I have that consciousness, the symbols appear as they are needed. And the symbols may be money one day, transportation the next day, hotel accommodations the next day, food, clothing, books, whatever it may be. These appear, since these are but the symbols or outer expressions of supply. Supply itself has never been seen, heard, tasted, touched, or smelled. Supply is God. Supply is spirit. Supply is the presence of the Lord with me. Supply is a life force that works through me. Now, if you need any proof of this, I will just ask you to visualize a tree, a fruit tree in your garden, and visualize it in the off season, when there is no fruit and there are no blossoms on the tree. But you are not going to cut the tree down. Why not? There's no supply there. You know better than that. You know right now that there is a life force operating in and through that tree that is forming the sap that will go up in through the trunk, out into the branch, and appear later as a blossom, and then later as the fruit. So you are not fooled at all by the barren tree. You don't say the tree has no supply. You don't say the tree is useless. You don't say the tree lacks. You just look at that tree and thank you, Father. I know what's taking place inside that tree. So it is with us. It really makes no difference. It should make no difference to any of you. It makes no difference to me what the state of my outer sense or visible supply may be at any given moment. If a hurricane came and blew it all away, I would still be where I am, and the life force would still be operating in my consciousness, and with a little patience, the blossoms and the fruit would appear again in the forms of dollar bills or whatever the need might be. All that is necessary is the recognition of this truth. There is a life force operating in you as it is in the trees. Why hasn't it become visible in greater measure? Because your consciousness wasn't attuned to the invisible, but to the visible. And most of the time, we have been trying to create in the visible. And you see, you can't multiply loaves and fishes in the visible. You cannot multiply dollars in the visible. If I start multiplying these, I'll go to jail very quickly. So if I want more of these, I must not multiply out here in the visible. I must do my multiplying in the invisible. And the manner of it is to realize that God is supply. God is closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, therefore my supply is closer to me than breathing. That God is infinite, therefore my supply is infinite. And like the fruit tree, heaven help the person who lets their fruit stay on that tree and doesn't pluck it. They will soon learn how quickly a tree can dry up and give forth no more fruit. It is only as we pluck the tree, as we take the fruit off and the flowers from the flower bushes, that this life force immediately goes to work to push out twice as many as it had before. So it is with our supply. It is only in proportion as we can love our neighbor, give out love, give out forgiveness, give out cooperation, always without seeking a return. Only the Indian giver gives and then seeks the return. The true spiritual light gives out of the fullness of a heart of givingness and seeks no return, because there is no need for a return. God is one's sufficient return. Now, when you see this, you see one of the major healing points in the infinite way. That it is your consciousness of truth that determines your supply. It isn't a God somewhere, it isn't a Christ somewhere, it isn't a spirit somewhere. It is your consciousness. Your developed consciousness, if you weren't born with such a consciousness, as how many have been, very few. In nearly every case, it has been a matter of a developed consciousness. Elijah wasn't even sure of Elisha's consciousness and put him through the test to see whether he had arrived at Christ's consciousness. So it is. The disciples were fishermen. We know that their consciousness was developed consciousness. Saul of Tarsus, we know his was a developed consciousness resulting in St. Paul. All down through the ages, St. Augustine, we know, was far from being a spiritual light, but he became a developed spiritual consciousness. And so with many on the path. Now, the secret is then that the source of your supply is your own consciousness of God as supply. So it is with health. Health is a matter of individual spiritual consciousness, your consciousness. If you seek a help of a practitioner, then in that moment your health depends on the developed spiritual consciousness of your practitioner. But that isn't going to do you much good forever, because sooner or later you're going to be in a position where it'll be your developed consciousness or none. And our function as students is to develop our individual consciousness to the point not only of being healed, but of healing. And so, you have to come back to this basic truth, that since I and the Father are one, God is my being. You might put it this way: God is being me. God is being me. God is living my life. I live, says Paul, yet not I. Christ liveth my life. And you have to come to that point ultimately where you say, why, I don't have health, I don't have wealth, I don't have anything. This is God's life, God's health, being me, living me. I live, yet not I. This is Christ, the Son of God, living my life. And then, in a measure, you start to drop the personal sense of health and supply, and you come to that grand finale where you say, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Son, all that I have is thine. When you come to that point, you have reached a place in your demonstration where the whole world falls off your shoulders. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. That just leaves me stripped without a thing, doesn't it? Until that next breath. Son, all that I have is thine. Now my mortality has been swallowed up and I'm clothed with immortality. My finite sense of self has been swallowed up, and now I'm clothed upon with God's immortality, God's infinity, God's grace, God's presence, God's power. And so I can truthfully say, I have no power. I of my own self can do nothing. I of my own self am nothing. If I speak of myself, I bear witness to a lie. The Father is my life. The Father is my supply. So it is. In these days through which you are living, which these newspapers tell us are the greatest days of fear ever known on the face of the globe, you have no need for fear. You need have no part in the world's fear. Why? As far as the world is concerned, no defense has been found, no bomb-proof shelter which is secure against these nuclear bombs. Therefore, well, just realize it. Our life is dependent on the good nature of Mr. Khrushchev. Now, isn't that a terrible thought to have for a godly people? Isn't that terrible? Of course it's terrible because it isn't true, is it? Our scripture tells us that God is a fortress. Now the question is, would you like to take issue with God? With the Bible? Would you like to make the statement that that is not true, that God is our fortress? In Him we place reliance? Is it not true that God is a high tower? Is it not true that we live and move and have our being in God? Do we need God and matter too? Do we need God and cement too? Haven't we proven over and over again that we don't need God and medicine? And haven't many proved that we don't need God and cement? That we don't need God and stone fortresses? God is our fortress, but that must be taken literally. God is a spirit, and God is infinite, and nothing can enter God that defileth or maketh a lie. And our life is hid with Christ in God. Now you see that without the practice of these truths, the Bible is nothing more nor less than a book on a table. It is not a living, demonstrable word. Actually, it is true that I and the Father are one, and therefore I live in God and God in me. I in thee and thou in me, for we are one. But just as you have to see that supply is invisible, health is invisible, so you have to see that safety and security are invisible properties of God, and you're in them. You dwell in the secret place of the Most High. You don't go there Sundays exclusively. You are there morning, noon, and night. You dwell, you live in the secret place of the Most High. You live and move and have your being in God if you realize that you yourself are invisible. You must remember that I am invisible. You do not see me. You are just looking up here at my body, and I am looking at yours. I can't see you unless, with my eyes closed, I can reach back inside of your eyes, and back there I'll find you, and I can begin to tabernacle with you and know you as you really are. I'll never get to know you by looking outwardly at your form, nor will you get to know me. For the form is but the visible evidence of me, just like the dollars are only the visible evidence of my supply. My supply is invisible, and I carry it wherever I go, even into my shower bath. But the visible evidence of it is outside, and so it is that I am invisible, but the visible evidence of me sits in this chair, and that is the form. But if you destroy this form, I will still be here. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Whithersoever thou goest, I will go. I will be with you unto the end of the world. And if it should be necessary, in 3 days I could raise up the form again that has been destroyed. If it's not necessary, I will go on about my business, but I will be here where I am, which is where you are, for I am you. I is God, and I is the life of you, so I am the life of you. Do you see that? The whole secret of spiritual living has to do with the invisible. It has to do with your recognition of the fact that your life is invisible. It is hid with Christ in God. Bullets can't do anything to it. Flames can't burn it. The Bhagavad Gita, I believe in the third chapter, third chapter, tells us that nothing, swords cannot touch it, fire cannot burn it, water cannot drown it. Life is invisible. My life is invisible. It is hid with Christ in God. And the Master taught the same thing, that if you destroy this temple, this visible form, in 3 days I will raise it up again. Why? Because you will not have touched I. You will not have touched me. And so it is that with every bit of destruction, construction begins at once. Now, all of this applies in the practice of our healing work, because we are dealing with the health of the body, the health of our supply. We are dealing with problems of safety and security. Every one of these problems comes to a practitioner. Students go traveling and want help. They want to be assured of safety and security on their journey, and there's only one way you can give it to them, and that is to assure them that they will never be in an airplane or in a ship or in a train or in a submarine, that these will always be in the student, since the student is infinite consciousness, the consciousness of God in which everything is embodied. And therefore, you will carry your airplane inside of you instead of you being inside of your airplane. Why? Because you are an invisible infinity, God made flesh. God is your being, therefore your being is infinite. Your being includes within itself every mode of transportation. Your students and patients will be traveling a lot by automobile, and many times they'll be fearful of the so-called bad drivers on the road and drunk drivers on the road. But this will not come nigh thy dwelling place if you can assure your student that they are never in an automobile. They're carrying the automobile in them. They are not victims of a driver outside themselves. That driver is inside of them, within their consciousness and subject to their consciousness of truth. Nothing is outside the realm of your individual consciousness. If I have a headache and ask you for help, you have become the law unto my health. If you observe anything of a negative nature about me, you have become the law under the transformation of that. And so it is. It's only necessary for you to know that there isn't a soul on this earth driving a car, airplane, or anything else that isn't in and of your consciousness and subject to your consciousness of good, of God. Therefore they are God-directed, God-maintained, God-sustained. Do you see how this applies then? Your health is a matter of my consciousness. And the moment somebody asks you for help, their health becomes a matter of your consciousness. And their health responds to your state of spiritual consciousness. And if you know these truths, if you know that life is invisible, never subject to matter or material conditions, if you know that supply is spiritual, never seen, always omnipresent, always infinite, if you know that God is a fortress and a high tower, an invisible cloak protecting you from every false belief of the human mind, you can walk up and down this earth and never be seen by the carnal mind. But you see, it rests with you. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. There are no mysterious gods sitting around waiting to do this for you. I need only remind you that in India, the average lifespan is 29 years. That in the United States it is, for the male, 67 years, and for the female, 74 years. She doesn't have quite so much worry, they tell us. Why the difference between India and the United States? Does God love the United States more than India? No. We're not going to be that foolish, are we? Does God love Americans more than he loves Hindus? We're not going to be that foolish as to believe that. God is no respecter of persons. What is the difference then? The difference is the degree of unfolded consciousness. That's the degree. If their consciousness were unfolded enough, expanded enough, well, we have seen this in the United States, where it is only a matter of 75 years ago when our Negroes were all illiterate slaves, and today we have Phi Beta Kappa Chi men and women of the Negro race. We have some really great intelligence and brains among the Negroes. Why this change? They merely have been given the opportunity to unfold their consciousness. They've taken advantage of it, that's all. They weren't illiterate Negroes because they were Negroes. They were that because they weren't given the opportunity for their consciousness to unfold and expand, and now they're being given that opportunity and they're finding their rightful place in society. So it is with the people all over the world. The day will come when there will be no labor strikes. I wouldn't be surprised that almost every one of us in this room will be right here on earth to witness that day. Why? Because it is known now that there never was a legitimate reason for a strike. Strikes have been brought about through ignorance of how to settle these affairs. Just as you know that wars will be outlawed very quickly. Why will they be? Because in this age we know that wars don't settle anything, therefore that can't be the way to settle them. But a few generations ago that wasn't known. If somebody disagreed with you, you got up and punched them. And if you were a country, you just sent your army out to punch them. And that was the way it was done, always with physical force. But that was because human consciousness was not unfolded enough to know that there isn't a subject in the world that can't be reasoned out at a table. But enlightened consciousness now reveals that to us, and the result is that in the United States we have very few strikes, and most things are being settled, and the strikes that we still have, we have mainly because the type of union leader is not yet the enlightened one. And as they give way to the more enlightened ones, strikes go out. So it is. We live on a border with Mexico, and we live on a border with Canada, and we have no wars with them. Why? Because they are two countries like ourselves with enough developed consciousness that we can reason out our problems without going to war about them. And that is becoming now universal. Now, if the metaphysical religions of this last 3/4 of a century have proven anything at all, it is that anyone can be a healer who seriously wants to be. Not easily always, oh no. To some it comes very, very easy to be a healer. To some that consciousness comes very quickly. To others slowly. But it's attainable by anybody who is determined enough to have it. Why? Because it has nothing to do with any mysterious outside gods. It has nothing to do with any mysterious outside powers. It has to do with what degree of developed consciousness can you bring to bear on a problem. Now, when you are called upon to help someone with supply, and you can say, certainly I'll give you that help. I'd like you to help along a little bit too by searching yourself and see if there isn't something that you can start to give somewhere where you haven't been giving it. Oh, not to your family. We know you're doing that all right. But to someone who isn't your family or someone who's your enemy. No, I can't think of a thing. Well, then search your clothing closet and see if there isn't something there that you might spare. Start this giving business, and you'll start the supply, and then I'll do the rest. And what do? You sit down, you get into meditation, and the first thing you do is you purge your own consciousness by realizing, Father, forgive this individual. They do not yet know that they have the infinity of spiritual supply right where they are, but I know it. I know that where they are, God is, and God is infinite, and God is supply. And so I know that supply is with them. I know that they are the very embodiment. I know that it's as true of them as of Jesus, that I have meat This person has meat that the world knows not of. This person has the bread of life, the staff of life, the wine, the water that springs up into life eternal. I know that they hath, because I know that all that the Father hath is theirs. And I know now that as they start to let loose of it and begin to yield a little bit on the giving side, that the rest will begin to flow. And soon you'll find out that your knowing this truth set them free from the belief of lack and limitation. Someone comes to you with a physical disease. Practice according to the infinite way, and if they want to tell you what the disease is and where it hurts them, let them, but don't hear them. Don't ever listen. Don't take it in, because you might believe it. If you believe it, you can't heal them. In our work, we do not care whether it's the head that hurts or the foot. We do not care whether it's internal or external. Why? Because we're not physicians. We don't know anything about anatomy, physiology, biology, chemistry. So we care nothing about the name or the nature of the disease that is bothering anyone. We care only for one thing. They have asked for help. Therefore, they must have enough faith to fulfill the Master's requirement. Do you believe that I can do this thing? Well, the chances are that if they've asked for help, they believe it. If they ask for help not believing, they may not get it. But if there is a grain of hope or confidence within them that they will get it, they will get it if your consciousness of truth is correct. If you go within and wipe out of yourself all bearing a false witness against your neighbor, and begin to know that this child is the very child that I am, for we are one in Christ Jesus, and all that I have is his or hers. All the help, all the harmony, all the peace, all of divine grace. And by abiding in the spiritual truth until you feel a little sense of release or peace within yourself, you will bring healing to your patient. Now, I must briefly touch on this. And this includes two words: idolatry, atheism. It is idolatry to believe that there is any power in form or effect. Even the food you eat feeds you by reason of the fact that there is an invisible life in the food which is feeding you. The form doesn't feed you, but the invisible life in the food feeds you. That is why we now have many cases of malnutrition, of people who are eating so heartily that they're pounds and pounds and pounds overweight, and yet become violently sick with malnutrition. And you know why? The life of the food has been taken out before it's been sold to them, and all that they get is husk. It was quite an article in one of our magazines in January which told our public that every one of the dry cereals which they buy in the stores hasn't an ounce of life or food in it, that it is nothing but husk that goes into the stomach without any life except the life that you add to it by adding some milk or cream or sugar or fruit. But in and of itself, these dry cereals are nothing but husks from which the life has been taken. And yet they're sold for food and for children's food. It has long been known in the States that the bread and the pies and the cakes we eat have all had the food values taken out of them before we get them, and we get the husks. It is for this reason that, was it last year, in Scotland they refused to allow the largest bakers in England to open branches in Scotland, because the largest bakers in England are using American recipes. And Scotland says, our people need bread. We're bread eaters, and we need the life in the bread, and you take it out. See that? It isn't the form that feeds you, it's the life in the form, and if the life's been taken out, you're not fed. So it is. Don't fear a form, whether it's the form called fever, form called lump, form called cancer, consumption, paralysis. Don't fear the form, for the form cannot harm you. It is idolatry to give power to a form. And you only begin healing when you get cured of idolatry, when you believe in golden calves in any form. Now, this subject may also be embraced under the head of atheism. Since you believe in God, and God is spirit, and God is invisible, put all of your faith in the invisible and none of it in anything that has visible form. Do not fear, hate, or love that which is visible. Use everything that's usable. Enjoy everything that's enjoyable. But don't put your hope and your faith in it. Don't put your hope and faith in a bomb-proof shelter. It may not stand up under the test. Don't put your faith in man whose breath is in his nostril. He may not prove up to the responsibility you place on his shoulder. You know that God is spirit, and spirit is invisible. Therefore, place your faith and hope and reliance in the invisible. And when you see any form that human sense says is destructive, treat it the way Jesus did leprosy or the blind man. Treat it as nothing. Don't fear it. Don't hate it. Don't try to get rid of it. Sit quietly and peacefully and realize if you exist as visible form, it would be idolatry or atheism to believe you have power. All power is in God the Spirit. These two subjects comprise one of our most important subjects. For on them our entire demonstration is built. And so until what time this evening?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock this evening. Time has flown away.